The cowboy came looking for food and tools, and discovered a hungry bride pleading for help. The quiet hum of morning filled the wide-open plains, broken only by the soft whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass. On this lonely stretch of land, a cowboy rode steadily along a dusty, uneven trail. His hat was pulled low to shade his eyes from the glaring sunlight, and his worn boots rested firmly in the stirrups of his horse. The horse, a strong, chestnut-colored mare, moved at a calm, steady pace, as if it understood that this journey was not a race but a careful path through the wilderness. The cowboy, whose name was James, had been traveling for days with one goal in mind: to find food and supplies to help him continue his life as a wandering rancher. Life in the open country was not easy. The land could be unforgiving, and the simple act of finding something to eat or a tool to fix a broken fence could be a matter of survival. James had grown accustomed to the solitude of the plains. He enjoyed the freedom it offered, the wide skies, and the chance to be alone with his thoughts. But at the same time, the loneliness sometimes pressed heavily on him, a silent companion on the long, empty trails. As he rode, James scanned the horizon carefully. Every hill, every tree line, every little wisp of smoke rising in the distance could be a sign of life or danger. Today, however, he hoped for the sight of a small farm or a cabin where he could barter for food and tools. His supplies were running dangerously low. The small bag of dried meat he carried would last only a day or two, and the tools he had brought to repair fences and equipment had begun to wear down from constant use. He knew he could not continue for long without finding help. The thought made his chest tighten slightly, not from fear but from the urgency that had become familiar during his travels. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. James took a deep breath and urged his horse forward, careful not to tire it too soon. He had been walking and riding for hours each day, and his horse needed to be treated with patience and respect. Along the way, James remembered the stories his father had told him about the plains. His father had been a rancher as well, but he had always emphasized that survival required more than just skill. It required observation, patience, and a kind heart. James had learned that even in the toughest moments, a kind action could make a difference, sometimes in ways one could not imagine. Hours passed as the sun climbed higher. The land seemed endless, a stretch of golden grass interrupted only by distant hills and occasional trees. James's stomach growled softly, reminding him of the food he lacked. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of jerky, chewing it slowly while scanning the horizon again. It was in these quiet moments that James felt most alive. The silence, the vastness, and the constant awareness of his surroundings sharpened his senses. Every bird call, every rustle in the grass could mean something, sometimes nothing, sometimes the discovery of what he sought. Just when James began to feel a flicker of discouragement, he noticed a small wisp of smoke rising in the distance. It was faint, almost blending with the morning haze, but it was unmistakable. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant someone had prepared a meal or was tending to a home. Excitement surged through him. He had not seen another soul in days, and the thought of human presence brought a sense of hope he had almost forgotten. He adjusted his hat, gave his horse a gentle nudge, and began riding toward the source of the smoke. With each step closer, the sounds of life became more distinct: the crackle of wood burning, the faint murmur of voices, and the distant clatter of tools. As James approached, he saw a small cabin tucked at the edge of a cluster of trees. It was simple, made of rough-hewn logs, with a roof that had weathered many storms. The smoke came from a small chimney, curling upward in lazy spirals. The cabin looked as if it had been untouched for some time, but the signs of life were there. James slowed his horse to a careful trot, observing every detail. Windows were dark and the door was slightly ajar. He felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. The plains had taught him that appearances could be deceiving. A cabin could mean safety, or it could mean trouble. Just as he reached the edge of the clearing, James heard a faint sound that made him pause. It was a soft, urgent voice calling for help. He stopped his horse, straining his ears. The voice came again, weak but desperate, echoing slightly across the open land. James's heart quickened and he scanned the area. Near the doorway of the cabin stood a young woman, her figure small against the rough wooden structure. She looked frightened and hungry, her clothes worn and dusty, her hair tangled from days of struggle. She raised her arms slightly, pleading with a silent urgency that spoke louder than words. James's instinct was to approach carefully. He had been in dangerous situations before, and while the plains could be harsh, human need often demanded immediate attention. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements gentle. The woman's eyes met his, wide with hope and relief. It was clear she had been alone for some time and had no one to turn to. Her voice trembled as she spoke, asking for food, for tools, for help. She seemed almost surprised to see another person, someone who could offer assistance. As James stepped closer, he noticed the small garden near the cabin, overgrown with weeds and struggling plants. A few broken tools lay scattered near the doorway. The signs were unmistakable. The woman had tried to manage on her own but lacked the strength and resources to succeed. Her hands were dirty, calloused from effort, and her face was pale from hunger. James felt a mix of compassion and determination. He had come looking for food and tools for himself, but now he realized that someone else's need was greater than his own. The woman's voice grew more urgent as she explained her situation. She had recently been married, and her husband had gone away for work, leaving her alone. Days had passed without sufficient food, and the tools she had were broken or insufficient. She had tried to maintain the small cabin, but the struggle had been overwhelming. Her words flowed quickly, filled with worry and fear, yet there was a spark of hope that James had arrived. He listened carefully, nodding, understanding that this was not a story of neglect but of circumstance. Life on the plains was difficult, and sometimes even the strongest could be caught unprepared. James assessed the situation calmly. He realized that his journey for personal survival had unexpectedly intersected with someone else's urgent need. The thought of leaving her alone was impossible. He reached into his saddlebag and offered her the small supplies he had, sharing the jerky and water he had carried. The relief on her face was immediate, and her eyes shone with gratitude. In that moment, James felt a shift within himself. The journey he had begun for personal gain had transformed into a mission to help someone who could not help herself. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cabin and the clearing. James and the young woman began talking more calmly, sharing stories of their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. The plains, which had seemed empty and endless, now held the possibility of connection, of shared humanity. James felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced in his solitary travels. The encounter was unexpected, yet it seemed as though fate had guided him to this place, to this moment, to someone who needed him. By the time the sun reached its peak, James had made a decision. He would not continue on his journey immediately. He would help her, provide what he could, and ensure she was safe. The discovery of a hungry, desperate soul had changed the course of his day, and perhaps the course of his life. He realized that sometimes, the most meaningful experiences came not from seeking what one needed for oneself, but from responding to the needs of others. In the wide-open plains, where life was often harsh and lonely, human compassion became a beacon of hope, stronger than any tool or supply he could carry. The first part of James's journey had begun with a simple goal, to find food and tools for survival. But it had led him to something far more significant, a chance to make a real difference, to bring hope and aid to someone who had been struggling alone. The plains stretched endlessly around them, Yet in that small clearing a connection had formed, one that would change both their lives. The young woman, once desperate and alone, now had someone who could help her. And James, the lone cowboy, found a purpose that extended beyond his own needs, a reminder that kindness could flourish even in the most desolate places. After offering her the small supplies he carried, James watched the young woman carefully as she accepted the food and water, with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the jerky from him, her eyes welling up with tears. James felt a lump in his throat, though he did his best to hide it. He had always believed that survival in the wilderness required strength, resilience, and independence. Yet here was someone whose strength had been tested in ways he could only imagine. It was one thing to face the harsh sun, the dry plains, and the occasional wild animal, but it was another to face complete isolation, hunger, and fear alone. The young woman, whose name was Clara, began to speak more openly now that she sensed James's kindness was genuine. She described her life in the cabin, the days since her husband had left for work, and how she had struggled to maintain the small plot of land surrounding the home. "I tried to manage," she said softly, "but the tools broke, the food ran out, and I didn't know what to do. I was so hungry, I didn't think anyone would come." Her voice quivered with a mixture of exhaustion and vulnerability. James listened intently, nodding, feeling the weight of her words. James could see that Clara had been alone for longer than a few days. Her clothes were worn, her shoes scuffed and dusty, and her hair hung in tangled strands. The small garden at the edge of the cabin was overgrown with weeds, and a few shriveled vegetables suggested that she had tried to grow food, but had not been able to keep up with the demands of survival. Broken tools lay scattered around, as if abandoned in frustration. Every detail spoke of a life interrupted by circumstance, a life that had become a struggle for mere existence. James gently suggested that they sit down for a moment, resting under the shade of a nearby tree. He could see that Clara's body was weary and her spirit needed encouragement. As they sat, he offered her some water from his canteen, watching as she drank slowly, savoring each drop. She looked at him with gratitude that needed no words, and James realized that sometimes the simple act of sharing could be the most powerful form of help. "You've been alone for a while," he said carefully, "but you're not alone now. I'll help you." Clara hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her face. I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. James shook his head gently. "You're not a burden. Everyone needs help sometimes. I'm glad I found you. We'll figure this out together." The warmth in his voice seemed to ease her tension. For the first time in days, Clara allowed herself to relax, even if just a little. As the morning sun climbed higher, James began examining the cabin and the surrounding area more closely. He could see that several repairs were needed. The roof had a few holes, the door hinge was loose, and the small fence around the garden had fallen in parts. The tools Clara had were rusty and insufficient. James, having grown up on a ranch, was used to making do with what was available, and he knew that with a few adjustments, the cabin could become a safe and functional place once again. Clara watched as he worked with quiet admiration, her eyes following each movement as he carefully fixed the door, reinforced the fence, and cleared weeds from the garden. As they worked side by side, Clara began sharing more of her story. She spoke of her husband, a kind man who had left her temporarily to earn money for their future. She spoke of the long days and nights she had spent alone, trying to manage the household, preparing meals from whatever scraps she could find, and praying that someone would come to help. Her voice held a mixture of sadness and resilience, a testament to her determination to survive despite the odds. James listened patiently, occasionally offering words of encouragement or advice. By mid-afternoon, the cabin was beginning to take on a livable shape. The door now swung smoothly on its hinges, The garden was partially cleared of weeds, and a small fire was crackling in the hearth. Clara's eyes shone with a mix of relief and gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly. James simply nodded, understanding that actions often spoke louder than words. The bond between James and Clara grew stronger as the day progressed. They shared stories of their pasts, their hopes, and their dreams. James spoke of his life as a wandering cowboy, the challenges of surviving in the open plains, and the people he had met along the way. Clara shared memories of her childhood, her hopes for a happy marriage, and her fears about the loneliness she had endured. Through these conversations, a sense of trust and understanding developed. They were no longer simply a traveler and a stranger. They were companions in a moment of shared humanity. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, James realized that the day had passed quickly. What had begun as a journey to find food and tools for himself had turned into a mission to help another human being survive. The satisfaction he felt was deeper than he had expected, rooted not in the supplies he had gathered, but in the act of giving, in the realization that his presence had brought hope and relief to someone who had been desperate and alone. Clara, too, began to feel a shift within herself. The hopelessness that had weighed heavily on her shoulders for days seemed lighter, replaced by a cautious optimism. She watched James with quiet admiration as he continued to repair what he could and organize the cabin. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually be able to survive until her husband returned. The presence of someone who cared, who had taken the time to help without asking for anything in return, was a comfort beyond measure. As evening fell, the two of them sat together by the fire, sharing a simple meal of what James had brought with him. The flames cast warm light on their faces, highlighting the lines of fatigue but also the glimmer of hope in their eyes. They talked about the next steps, how they would gather more food, repair the rest of the cabin, and ensure that Clara could remain safe and fed until her husband returned. Plans were made carefully, taking into account the limited resources available and the harshness of the land around them. Night settled over the plains, wrapping the cabin in darkness and silence. The wind whispered through the grass, and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. James and Clara felt a sense of peace, knowing that they had accomplished something important together. The loneliness that had defined Clara's days was replaced by companionship, and James felt a renewed sense of purpose that he had not known before. In that small cabin, surrounded by the vastness of the plains, they had discovered a connection that transcended circumstance, a shared humanity, a willingness to help, and a sense of hope that even the harshest days could not extinguish. Before going to sleep, James stepped outside for a moment, gazing at the endless horizon. The plains stretched in every direction, silent and vast, but he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had made a difference. He had come looking for food and tools, expecting only to satisfy his own needs, yet he had found something far more meaningful, a chance to help someone in real need, to offer relief, and to form a bond that would be remembered long after the day had ended. Inside, Clara prepared a small bed near the hearth, feeling a sense of comfort she had not felt in weeks. The fire's warmth wrapped around her, and for the first time she allowed herself to sleep without fear, knowing that someone watched over her, that she was not alone, and that she had a chance to survive until help, or her husband, returned. The events of the day had changed both their lives in quiet but profound ways, reminding them that even in the most challenging circumstances, kindness and compassion could transform despair into hope. As the night deepened, both James and Clara rested, each in their own way reflecting on the day's unexpected journey. The plains outside remained vast and indifferent, but within the small cabin, warmth, hope, and human connection had taken root. They had come together by chance, yet their meeting had become a turning point, a reminder that even in isolation, the simple acts of care and courage could bridge gaps and bring light into the darkest moments. Morning arrived quietly, with the pale sunlight spilling over the horizon and casting soft shadows across the plains. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. Inside the small cabin, James stirred awake, stretching his tired muscles. The previous day had been long and filled with work, but he felt a quiet satisfaction in his chest. Clara had slept peacefully through the night, and the warmth from the fire lingered in the small room. He knew the day ahead would be another challenge, but he also knew it would be a chance to continue helping someone who truly needed it. Clara was already awake when James emerged from his slumber. She was sitting near the hearth, brushing her hair and tidying the small space. Though still tired, her face held a faint glow of hope. The events of the previous day had left her feeling safer, her fear replaced by cautious optimism. When she noticed James, she smiled softly, a gesture that conveyed gratitude without needing words. James nodded in return, acknowledging the bond that had begun to form between them. After a simple breakfast of what remained from James's supplies, they began to talk more in depth. Clara shared the story of her marriage, the excitement she had felt when her husband had come for her, and the hope she had carried for a future together. She spoke of the day her husband left for work, and how quickly everything had changed once she was left alone. "I thought I could manage," she admitted, "but the land, the cabin, and everything else, it was too much. I didn't know how I would survive." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was strength beneath it, a determination to keep going, even when circumstances seemed overwhelming. James listened carefully, asking gentle questions to understand the situation better. He learned that the cabin had once been part of a small family farm, but over time, repairs had been neglected, and the land had become difficult to manage. Clara had tried her best, but without proper tools and experience, she had struggled to grow food and maintain the home. She had rationed what little she had, and the days of scarcity had begun to take a toll on her health and spirit. Listening to her, James realized the depth of her resilience. Despite everything, she had survived on her own for days. Once Clara finished sharing her story, James suggested that they plan together for the day. "We need to make sure you have food, water, and shelter," he said. "And we should fix what we can before the sun gets too high." Clara nodded, grateful for his guidance. Though she had struggled alone, the presence of someone experienced and willing to help made the tasks ahead seem possible rather than overwhelming. They made a list of priorities: repairing the cabin roof, clearing the remaining weeds from the garden, fixing the fence, and gathering firewood for the coming days. They began by examining the roof. James climbed carefully, checking for loose shingles and weak spots. Clara watched from below, holding the tools and offering advice when needed. Though inexperienced with roof repair, she had observed her father working on their family home in her childhood and remembered some of the techniques. Working together, they managed to replace the broken shingles and secure the roof, making the cabin safer from rain or wind. Each nail hammered and each shingle replaced brought a sense of accomplishment and security. Next, they turned their attention to the garden. Clara led James to the plot of land where vegetables had struggled to grow. She pointed out the areas that had been most neglected and explained what she had tried to plant. James suggested removing the weeds carefully and creating small rows for planting new seeds. Together, they pulled weeds, cleared debris, and turned the soil. Clara's strength surprised James. Though her body was weary, her determination shone through in every movement. They found a few vegetables that had survived and carefully harvested them, setting them aside for their next meal. As the day progressed, the pair also worked on the fence surrounding the garden. The old wooden posts had rotted, and some had fallen entirely. James demonstrated how to replace the posts and secure the crossbeams, while Clara held the pieces in place and passed him nails and hammer. It was hard work, and the sun beat down on them, but the shared effort brought a sense of teamwork and purpose. They spoke quietly as they worked, exchanging stories of their childhoods, of lessons learned, and of hopes for the future. The mundane work became a way to build trust and understanding between them. By midday, the cabin and garden were beginning to show real progress. The structure was sturdier, the garden more organized, and the fence solid. James suggested a brief rest, and they sat together under the shade of a nearby tree, drinking water and catching their breath. Clara's face reflected relief and pride. "I never thought I could do this on my own," she admitted. James smiled. "You're learning quickly, and you don't have to do it alone anymore." His words carried a warmth that made her feel safe and supported, something she had not felt in a long time. After their brief rest, they gathered firewood for the evening. James taught Clara how to identify dry branches suitable for burning and how to stack them for a steady fire. They worked quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the plains around them, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of the wind through the grass, the faint hum of insects beginning to stir as the afternoon approached. Clara felt a calmness she hadn't experienced in days. For the first time, she saw hope not only in survival but in companionship. The presence of someone willing to share both work and conversation made the isolation she had endured feel distant. As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, James and Clara returned to the cabin to prepare for the evening. They lit a small fire in the hearth, the warm glow filling the room with light and comfort. Clara carefully prepared the vegetables they had gathered earlier, while James tended to the fire and arranged the space for rest. The simplicity of the meal contrasted with the complexity of their lives, but it was nourishing in every way, physically and emotionally. Eating together, they spoke of the next few days, planning how to gather more food, maintain the cabin, and ensure safety. During the quiet moments around the fire, Clara began to reflect on how much had changed in just a short time. She had faced fear, hunger, and loneliness, yet now she felt a spark of confidence. She looked at James and realized that his arrival had transformed her situation entirely. His willingness to help without hesitation or judgment had given her strength to face the challenges ahead. She began to understand that survival was not just about physical endurance, but about human connection, trust, and shared effort. James, too, reflected on the day's events. He had started his journey simply looking for food and tools, yet he had discovered something far more meaningful. Helping Clara had reminded him why he had chosen the life of a wandering cowboy, not merely for freedom or adventure, but for the chance to live with purpose, to make a difference when he could. He felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that his presence had brought hope and safety to someone who needed it desperately. As night fell, the plains outside the cabin were quiet and still. The stars emerged, bright against the deep blue sky, and the moon cast a gentle glow over the land. Inside, James and Clara prepared for rest. The cabin was safer, the garden more orderly, and the firewood stacked for the coming days. They shared a sense of accomplishment, knowing that their efforts had made a real difference. The hardships of the past days seemed less daunting now, replaced by a cautious optimism and a renewed sense of possibility. Before going to sleep, James stepped outside for a moment, looking out across the plains. The land stretched endlessly, vast and quiet, but it no longer seemed empty. In the small cabin, Clara had found hope and James had found purpose. The encounter, which had begun as a simple search for supplies, had grown into something far more profound. The realization that helping others could bring meaning to even the hardest of journeys. Inside, Clara arranged her small bed near the hearth, feeling safer and more prepared than she had in days. She thought about the challenges ahead but no longer felt overwhelmed. With James's guidance and support, she knew she could survive, and she allowed herself a sense of relief and gratitude. The warmth of the fire, The presence of a kind companion and the progress they had made together filled her heart with hope. The day had been long, filled with hard work, discovery, and conversation, but it had also been transformative. Clara had learned new skills, gained confidence, and realized that she was not alone. James had discovered the power of compassion, the satisfaction of helping someone in need, and the joy of shared effort. Together, they had taken the first steps toward rebuilding both the cabin and Clara's confidence. As sleep came, the two rested peacefully, each reflecting on the day's events and the journey ahead. The plains outside were silent, yet within the small cabin, warmth, hope, and human connection had taken root. They had met by chance, yet their encounter had become a turning point, a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, courage, kindness, and cooperation could create a path forward. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the sun rising slowly over the endless plains. The cool air carried the scent of fresh earth, and the sound of birds filled the quiet morning. Inside the small cabin, James stirred first, stretching his arms and feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from the previous day's work. Despite the fatigue, he felt energized by the progress they had made and the bond forming between him and Clara. She was already awake, kneeling near the hearth and tidying the small space. Her movements were slower than usual, but her face held a quiet determination, reflecting the inner strength she had gained over the past 2 days. After sharing a simple breakfast of leftover vegetables and bread, they set out to continue their work. Today's tasks were more challenging than the previous day, repairing the remaining parts of the cabin, expanding the small garden, and finding additional firewood for the coming days. James and Clara worked side by side, their teamwork improving with each task. James taught her how to handle tools more efficiently, while Clara offered observations about the cabin that he had not noticed. Their shared efforts made the work lighter and more effective, and each small success brought smiles and a sense of accomplishment. The first task was finishing the repairs to the cabin's exterior. Some of the wooden beams had weakened over time, and the roof still had minor leaks. James carefully climbed the ladder, securing loose beams and replacing broken wood. Clara stood below, passing him nails, hammering when instructed, and keeping a watchful eye on the structure. Though inexperienced at first, she learned quickly, mimicking James's careful movements and growing more confident with each strike of the hammer. The cabin began to look sturdier and more secure, and Clara felt pride in her ability to contribute meaningfully to the repairs. Once the exterior repairs were done, they turned their attention to the garden. The small plot of land was still overgrown in some areas, and Clara explained which vegetables had survived and which had withered. James suggested clearing the weeds and creating new rows for planting. Together, they pulled weeds, dug the soil, and planted fresh seeds. Clara learned how to water the plants properly and space them so they could grow well. Each seed they planted felt like a small promise of hope, a symbol that they could work together to build a life even in the midst of hardship. As they worked, the sun climbed higher and the heat began to press down on them. They paused occasionally to drink water and rest in the shade of a nearby tree. During these breaks, their conversations deepened. Clara spoke more about her family and childhood, sharing stories of her siblings and the small village where she had grown up. James spoke of his travels across the plains, the challenges of living as a wandering cowboy, and the lessons he had learned from his father. Through their stories, a bond grew stronger, built not only on shared work but on understanding, trust, and empathy. By midday, they had gathered enough firewood for several days and stacked it neatly near the cabin. Clara's confidence continued to grow. She no longer hesitated when handling tools or performing tasks she had once found daunting. James noticed her improvement and praised her efforts, making her smile with pride. "You're learning fast," he said. "Soon, you'll be able to manage this place even on your own." Clara felt a sense of empowerment she had not experienced in a long time. The cabin, the garden, and the small fenced area around it were becoming not just places of survival but symbols of her growing independence. After a brief lunch, they focused on clearing the area around the cabin. James suggested trimming the tall grass that could hide wild animals and creating a clear path to the nearby water source. Clara helped, learning how to use the tools efficiently while staying safe. The work was exhausting, but each cut of the scythe and each cleared patch of land felt like progress. The small clearing made the cabin feel safer, and Clara could see that their combined efforts were transforming the environment into a more manageable and secure place. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, James proposed a new task, teaching Clara how to hunt small game for food. He knew that relying solely on stored supplies or vegetables from the garden would not be enough to sustain her until her husband returned. Clara was hesitant at first, uncertain about handling a weapon, but James reassured her that he would guide her every step of the way. He explained the importance of patience, observation, and respect for nature. Together, they ventured into the nearby brush, moving quietly and watching for signs of movement. Though they did not catch anything that day, Clara learned the essential skills needed for survival, gaining both knowledge and confidence. By late afternoon, they returned to the cabin, tired but satisfied with the day's accomplishments. The garden looked healthier, the cabin was more secure, and the surrounding area had been cleared for safety. Clara prepared a simple meal with the vegetables they had harvested and a small portion of dried meat James had carried. They ate together by the hearth, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the comfort of a shared meal. Clara's face glowed with satisfaction, and James felt a deep sense of contentment. Their efforts had tangible results, and both understood that they had created a foundation for continued survival and stability. After dinner, they sat quietly by the fire, reflecting on the day. Clara expressed her gratitude, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how I would have managed without you," she said softly. James nodded, feeling a similar sense of fulfillment. "We're stronger when we work together," he replied. "You've done amazing today, and you're learning so fast. This place is becoming safe and livable because of both of us." The warmth of the fire and the shared sense of accomplishment created a sense of peace and reassurance. As night fell, the plains outside became quiet, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. James and Clara prepared for rest, stacking the remaining firewood and ensuring the cabin was secure. They shared a moment of reflection, considering how far they had come in just a few days. Clara, who had been desperate and alone when James arrived, now felt capable, confident, and hopeful. James, who had set out simply to find food and tools for himself, had discovered the profound satisfaction of helping another person survive and thrive. Before going to sleep, James stepped outside once more, looking across the wide plains. The land stretched endlessly, silent and unchanging, yet it no longer seemed empty. In the small cabin, warmth, hope, and human connection had taken root. The meeting that had seemed coincidental had become a turning point, creating a safe haven in the midst of the harsh wilderness. Clara, who had been on the verge of despair, now felt empowered and supported, while James felt a sense of purpose he had never anticipated. Inside, Clara arranged her small bed near the hearth, feeling a newfound sense of security. The day's work had not only improved the cabin but also strengthened her confidence. She thought about the coming days, understanding that there would still be challenges, but she now had the tools, knowledge, and support to face them. The presence of someone willing to guide and protect her had made all the difference, and she allowed herself to feel hope for the first time in a long while. As the night deepened, both James and Clara rested peacefully. The cabin was safer, the garden thriving, and the firewood ready for the cold nights to come. The plains outside remained vast and indifferent, yet within this small cabin, warmth, cooperation, and shared effort had created a sense of home. They had met by chance, but their encounter had grown into something meaningful, a reminder that courage, compassion, and teamwork could transform even the most difficult circumstances. The fourth day of their journey together ended with the quiet understanding that life, even in the most challenging environments, could be shaped by human effort and kindness. James had learned the value of helping another, and Clara had discovered her own strength and resilience. Together, they had turned a small, struggling cabin into a livable, safe place, a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the power of working together. As sleep claimed them, the stars shone brightly above the plains, and the moon cast its gentle light across the cabin. Inside, warmth, hope, and the quiet hum of life filled the small space. James and Clara, once strangers, now shared a bond forged through shared effort, trust, and compassion. The challenges of the day had brought them closer, teaching them lessons that would remain long after the plains had quieted and the sun had risen again. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a soft golden glow across the small cabin and the surrounding land. James awoke with a sense of calm and purpose, feeling the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the work he and Clara had done was making a real difference in her life. Clara was already awake, sitting near the hearth and tidying up the small space with practiced efficiency. Her face held a glow of confidence and contentment that had not been there just a few days ago. The cabin, once fragile and neglected, now stood as a safe and welcoming home, a testament to their hard work, cooperation, and shared determination. Over a simple breakfast of vegetables from the garden and a small portion of dried meat, James and Clara talked about the future. "You've done amazing," James said, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "The cabin is secure, the garden is growing, and you've learned so much about taking care of yourself." Clara smiled softly, feeling pride and relief. "I never thought I could do this," she admitted. "But you showed me how, and I feel like I can handle whatever comes next." Her words reflected not just gratitude but a growing sense of independence and self-reliance. After breakfast, they focused on organizing supplies for the days to come. James had taught Clara how to ration food, care for the garden, and maintain the cabin. Together, they checked the storage areas, making sure there was enough firewood, water, and preserved food for the upcoming days. James also shared tips on basic first aid and safety, preparing Clara for unexpected challenges. The tasks were practical, but they also reinforced her confidence and sense of security. Clara realized that with knowledge, preparation, and determination, she could manage life even in the harshest conditions. Once the cabin was fully organized, James and Clara took a moment to walk outside and survey the land. The plain stretched endlessly in every direction, yet the small clearing around the cabin now looked welcoming and secure. The garden had neat rows of vegetables, the fence was strong, and the repaired cabin stood solid against the elements. Clara ran her hands over the fence posts and smiled. "I can't believe how much we've done in just a few days," she said. James nodded, feeling a quiet pride himself. "It's amazing what people can do when they work together," he replied. "And you've done the hardest part, learning and adapting." As the afternoon sun warmed the land, they discussed ways to continue improving the cabin and the surrounding area. James suggested building a small shed for additional storage, reinforcing the roof further, and creating a pathway to the nearby water source for easier access. Clara eagerly agreed, ready to continue learning and contributing. Though she had once felt powerless and alone, she now embraced the idea of planning and building for the future. Their teamwork was seamless, a combination of James's experience and Clara's newfound confidence. Later in the day, they decided to take a break and rest in the shade of a tree near the cabin. The quiet of the plains surrounded them, and for a moment they simply enjoyed the stillness. Clara spoke softly, reflecting on how much her life had changed since James had arrived. "I felt so lost before," she admitted. "I didn't know how to survive alone and I was scared every day. But now I feel like I can face anything." James listened, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had set out on his journey seeking food and tools for himself, yet he had found something far more meaningful: the chance to make a real difference in someone's life. As the day wore on, they continued their work, building the small shed and reinforcing the remaining parts of the cabin. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land and painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The sight reminded them both of the beauty and harshness of the plains, the endless expanse that could be both unforgiving and inspiring. Clara paused for a moment to take in the view, realizing that even in isolation, life could be full of hope and possibility when guided by determination and compassion. That evening, after a meal shared by the warm fire, James and Clara reflected on the journey they had shared. They spoke of challenges they had faced together, the skills Clara had learned, and the bond that had formed between them. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for the help James had provided, but also for the encouragement, patience, and understanding he had shown. James, in turn, reflected on how much he had gained from the experience: the satisfaction of helping someone in need, the joy of companionship, and the knowledge that small acts of kindness could have a profound impact. As night fell, the plains became quiet and the sky filled with stars. James and Clara prepared for rest, ensuring the cabin was secure and the fire was safely contained. The small space, once a symbol of struggle and vulnerability, now felt like a home. Clara arranged her bed near the hearth, feeling a sense of comfort and protection she had not known for days. James settled nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. Though the night was dark and the land vast, the warmth of the cabin and the bond they shared created a feeling of safety and peace. During the quiet of the night, Clara thought about the future. She realized that she had grown stronger, more capable, and more confident. The despair that had weighed on her had been replaced by hope and determination. She understood that survival was not just about food and shelter, but also about knowledge, resilience, and connection with others. James's guidance had given her the tools to face challenges independently, but his presence had also reminded her of the power of compassion and human kindness. The following days passed with a rhythm of work and reflection. James continued to teach Clara practical skills: how to care for the garden, maintain the cabin, and gather food from the land. Clara practiced diligently, learning quickly and taking initiative. She began to anticipate needs, prepare supplies, and manage small tasks on her own. The transformation in her confidence was remarkable. Each day, she felt more capable, more empowered, and more prepared to face the challenges of life on the plains. James, meanwhile, recognized that his journey had changed. He had set out seeking simple necessities for himself, but he had found purpose in helping another person survive and thrive. The satisfaction he felt went beyond physical accomplishment. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply fulfilling. The connection he had formed with Clara reminded him that life's greatest rewards often came from selflessness, patience, and compassion. One afternoon, after completing a day's work on the cabin and garden, James suggested they take a walk toward the nearby hills. The view from the top was breathtaking. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with occasional trees and patches of wildflowers, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Clara felt a sense of freedom and possibility she had not known before. Standing beside James, she realized that life, even in its simplest form, could be full of meaning and beauty. She felt grateful for the chance encounter that had brought him into her life, and she understood that their bond was one of mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. As evening approached, they returned to the cabin, tired but content. The work of survival had become a shared journey, a partnership built on trust, guidance, and collaboration. Clara's confidence had grown, the cabin was secure, and the garden promised food for the coming days. The challenges they had faced together had strengthened their bond, teaching them both valuable lessons about resilience, compassion, and the importance of human connection. That night, as the stars filled the sky and the moon cast a gentle light over the plains, James and Clara prepared for rest. Inside the cabin, warmth and safety filled the space, replacing the fear and uncertainty that had once dominated their lives. Clara arranged her small bed near the hearth, feeling protected and empowered. James settled nearby, reflecting on the journey they had shared and the transformation that had taken place. The story of the cowboy and the hungry bride reached its quiet, meaningful conclusion not with grand gestures or dramatic events, but with small acts of courage, compassion, and perseverance. Clara had gone from a frightened, desperate young woman to a confident, capable individual ready to face the challenges ahead. James had discovered the profound satisfaction of helping another, the joy of companionship, and the power of kindness to transform lives. In the vastness of the plains, where life could be harsh and unforgiving, they had created a space of warmth, safety, and hope. The cabin stood as a symbol of their efforts, the garden as a promise of sustenance, and their bond as a testament to the strength of human connection. They had met by chance, but their encounter had changed both their lives forever. As sleep claimed them, the night settled quietly over the plains. The wind whispered through the grass, and the stars shone brightly in the endless sky. Inside the cabin, warmth, safety, and the shared spirit of resilience filled the air. The young bride, once desperate and alone, now felt empowered and hopeful. The cowboy, who had traveled the plains seeking only supplies, had discovered the deeper meaning of purpose and compassion. Together, they had faced challenges, shared victories, and created a lasting connection. The story ended not with the resolution of every difficulty but with a sense of hope and possibility. Life on the plains would always be unpredictable, yet Clara had learned that she was capable, resilient, and never truly alone. James had learned that kindness, guidance, and human connection could make the harshest world brighter. In their shared journey, they had found courage, hope, and the understanding that even in the most difficult circumstances, people could make a difference in each other's lives. And so the plains continued their quiet existence, vast and endless, yet within the small cabin, two lives had been forever changed, bound together by compassion, trust, and the courage to face the world together.